I've been at Open Rights Group for about less than 2 months, so I probably know a lot less than everyone in this room. But I just wanted to tell you a little bit about the We Promise campaign we're part of as the build up to the European elections. So we've been asking MEP candidates, pop campaigners Europe-wide, to ask all MEP candidates to sign up to a digital rights charter. Over 30, about 31 British MEPs so far have signed up, but we're also asking EU citizens to sign up as well, to commit to saying they will vote for candidates that support digital rights. So if you haven't signed up, please do go on to the Open Rights Group website, and then if you look in our campaigns, we can tell you how you can do that as well. Also, obviously, if any of you are interested in becoming members of the Joint Org, I don't know who is a member, who isn't, please do talk to me, or have a look on our website as well. I'm going to stay around as long as I can.
I've actually got a sign-up sheet here as well. So.
Perfect, there we go. That's brilliant. So really, I'm going to hand over to Tom. Oh, the other thing is, I'm tweeting, and if anyone else is tweeting, please use the hashtag EU Digital Debate. Thank you, and I apologise for today.
Lovely. Well, thank you to everyone for coming. So the idea here is that you get a chance to ask questions of our MEP candidates for the East of England. What we'll do is we'll start off with a 2-minute introduction from each candidate. We'll try and keep it to 2 minutes as well. I have a timer. Then what we'll do is we'll go on to several different subjects around digital rights, after which, if we have time, we'll try and look at other digital subjects and then anything else. So the subjects we'll be talking about this evening, if you want to get your questions ready, are net neutrality, surveillance, data protection, transparency, web filtering, free speech and censorship, and then anything else including open source, anonymity, that sort of thing. As Pam mentioned, please use the hashtag EU Digital Debates if you want to tweet about tonight. Also, I'll be taking anonymous questions, so if there's something you want to ask but you don't want to put your hand up, you can tweet us. If you tweet at Org Norwich, that's ORG Norwich, then I won't read out who sent the tweet, but I'll ask the questions anonymously. At any time, if you've got a question, you can pop your hand up, and then I'll try and get to you as soon as we can, and I'll try and answer as many questions as we can as well. So I think that is about it from me. So I'd first like to introduce the candidates. So we have Vicky Ford from the Conservatives, Joe Hayes from the Liberal Democrats, and Andrew Boswell from the Green Party. So thank you very much for coming. And Vicky Ford, we'll start with you for 2 minutes. Go when you're ready.
Okay, well, so thank you very much for coming along tonight. It's obviously a great shame that the two parties who came second and third in this part of the country in the last European election haven't turned up this evening, which is, of course, UKIP and Labour. But it's good that the Lib Dems and the Greens and myself are here. Our message most generally in the European elections is that we believe Europe needs to change. It needs to be much more focused on working for business and business users, and I would put the whole use of the internet, whether that's personal or business users, in that area. We need to make sure that we have international agreements that work for business and personal users. But at the same point, we need various reforms for the UK, including reducing the cost of Europe, looking again at issues to do with our law, looking at issues to do with migration, keeping ourselves out of the euro and the euro bailouts. In my work in the European Parliament, I've very much been focused on the international arrangements for things like science and research. Very important that we have a digital economy that works for science and research as well as for business and personal users. Another key part of the Conservative manifesto is that we do think the British people are owed a vote on Europe. We do think they're owed the opportunity for an in-out referendum, but we want to see a proper negotiation so that they have a proper set of principles to vote on, and that's why we've set an agenda towards 2017 as the time by which we will have a referendum. We want to have a Europe that works for business, but we want to have reforms that work for Britain as well. Thank you very much.
Lovely. And Andrew Boswell.
Can I just ask if candidates could speak up, because it's quite difficult to hear.
Of course, yeah. Okay.
Hello, I'm Andrew Boswell from the Green Party. I'm not actually a candidate on the list. I'm standing in for Rupert Reid, our lead candidate, so I just want to make that clear. I am a county councillor in Norfolk, and I'm also the leader of the Greens on the City Council here in Norwich. My previous career, I've worked with computers a lot, having started in science. I then worked from 1985 to the mid-90s in the design of very large-scale integrated circuits, which are the sort of circuits which are part of all the networks and computers today. And after 1995 till 2006, I worked at the University of East Anglia supporting scientific computing and running basically a small supercomputer on the campus there. And I was just thinking, actually, while we're standing outside, that it was 44 years since I wrote my first computer program, and that was a program in a language called Fortran 4, and the computer was a room the size of this room. And I think one of the things which is very relevant to the debate tonight, we've gone from something like that, where you actually put punch cards in just 44 years ago, to something like this, which is probably 100 times more powerful than that computer. And in 1.5 generations, the technology has moved on incredibly, but our legislative and social structures around it haven't moved on accordingly. And that's a lot of the sort of issues with surveillance and so on, which I think we'll be discussing. And I think the Snowden revelations last year were absolutely a watershed wake-up call. Wake-up call to look what's happening to the technology, what's happening about our personal rights on the internet and surveillance. And I think the politicians are only really just catching up. Last week we saw a Home Affairs Select Committee report saying that the scrutiny of the intelligence services has a lot to be desired, and I think we'll talk about that further and open that up. But that's just the tip of the iceberg, really. And so, as I said, politicians only just catching up. And I'd just like to finish by saying that our candidate, Rupert Reid, I understand, has signed the Charter, the Open Rights Charter. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much. Jo Hayes.
I'm number 2 on the Liberal Democrats European candidates list, behind Andrew Duff, MEP, who can't be here, I'm afraid, because he's got a conflicting appointment, I think, with students in Cambridge. We came 3rd in this region last time. In fact, Labour came 4th. I'm a barrister. I've been a barrister for over 30 years, and I don't have any specialist knowledge of computers, but as soon as it became possible to use computers for legal research, I went at it like a duck to water. And for me, it's very much what I can make it do for me, rather than understanding the technicalities. But I'm now in a very fast-changing legal profession where books are really going rather out of date, and even the High Court judges have got online libraries behind the scenes. So searching and finding authority for propositions has become completely transformed by all this. I'm very excited. I absolutely love Wikipedia. And I see the growth of the internet is a very liberating thing, because it's empowered citizens against governments. And thinking what I would say this evening about what is the sort of unifying principle that for me is at the heart of my lived ed beliefs, I think it is what the late great Earl Russell, who was Bertrand Russell's son, amazingly enough, who died a few years ago. He once said to me that it was all about the controlling the abuse of power. And sometimes you have to use the government to control abuse of power by large corporations, and sometimes you have to use other means to control abuse of power by government. But to me, it's very natural that the ALDE group, which is the Alliance of Liberals and Democrats in Europe, has been fighting on the side of net neutrality and an end to roaming charges, and it's been very active in the light of the Snowden revelations in demanding that, really in putting itself in conflict with the UK government, in saying that citizens' privacy has got to be protected against big government. So thank you very much for inviting me.
Okay, thank you very much. So we'll move on to some questions now. We'll start with net neutrality. There was a recent landmark ruling in Europe which has passed a law that says that ISPs cannot charge different amounts for different types of data, which is a big move into net neutrality territory. So the first question to the panel, and we'll go for Vicky first. Do we need net neutrality legislation? What I'll do is I'll give you about a minute or so to speak, and I'll give you all a minute or so to speak, and then if you want to come back to each other, then you can. So do we need net neutrality legislation?
Now, maybe I can first of all take more than a minute to explain that this was actually a much wider package of legislation. This legislation, which was on the single market and telecoms, clubbed together 3 different areas. And I should explain, by the way, my career was in infrastructure investing, especially in building telecoms infrastructure. And we do need a lot more telecoms infrastructure in Norwich. We need super connected infrastructure in the city. And in our rural areas, we could do with even half decent broadband in a lot of areas. So there were 3 different areas, one of which was the roaming and prices for consumers. There was a part of the package to do with how licenses are granted, and then there was another bit to do with how the internet is used, and that's where the net neutrality came into it. Now, on roaming, I completely agree that in the past, when people have moved to another country, there have been some exorbitant fees, and the European Parliament has done a lot of work in bringing down the cost of roaming so that you won't get hammered as soon as you move across the border. Okay? And especially on the continent, that's been very important. But I'm a bit concerned that this current package, Joe, has actually gone too far, because now what you're seeing is that wealthy people like me go across and get very cheap deals when I move and can roam like at home wherever I am on the continent. But then the cost is being passed on to the pay-as-you-go low-income user at home. And actually now it's almost impossible to buy a normal pay-as-you-go package. And you lose your minutes each month. So actually, there is a concern in my mind that we may have gone too much in favour of the international business person and not enough to support the rights of the ordinary low-end consumer on the roaming. But that's one part of the package. The next part of the package was on licenses. Now, the single market has actually been very good in terms of granting licenses, because one of the reasons why we've all been able to get better phones in the UK and get 3G, now 4G phones, is because across Europe we've all freed up the airwaves together, okay? And so therefore we've freed up spectrum together. It's meant that instead of just looking at the UK and 60 million consumers, you've got a market of 600 million consumers, and we'll all have the ability to be able to have one set of handsets that works along different countries, because we've all freed up the wavelengths together. Having said that, the single market package that just went through, in my view, was now going to set too much power in Brussels of overseeing how licenses are granted. So, for example, I would have liked to see more in the UK licenses about coverage in rural areas, just of even basic voice coverage, which can be very poor in parts of Norfolk and East Anglia. But there's too much in the package, in my view, at the moment about central control on licenses, timing of licenses, etc. Doesn't mean that you shouldn't work together on licenses. On the issue of net neutrality, I think it's extremely important that you don't have blocking, and that, as you say, you should have internet free to use. Okay, there is a bit of concern about some of the language which these two parties have put in on the net neutrality, that it may have gone a bit too far on an issue that's called specialised services. So specialised services They're looking at internet TV, for example, where sometimes the operator wants to be able to optimize service if it's a lot of data being downstreamed or video being downstreamed. So they sometimes need to give more priority to one user than to another user. If you look at it in my house, we don't have great broadband. So if I want to look at something for work, I have to tell my kids to stop downloading so much. And it's a bit the same when you've got the company. So net neutrality, good. The devil is in the detail. And I'm a bit concerned that the detail may have gone a bit too far on this issue.
Okay, Andrew Boswell.
Well, we've had a lot of detail there. I think that the legislation is particularly good in the areas of making the charges equal across Europe. I mean, we have lived in this ridiculous thing where you go to Europe and it costs £1.
But not if you now can't buy a cheap prepaid card as a result.
Sorry, can we just give Andrew a
argument,
couple of minutes?
I don't think that necessarily is the fault of the legislation. Going for a fair price to start with is right. You then have to regulate the companies more if you want to get on top of that problem. I don't think you can really conflate the issue of pay-as-you-go getting more expensive with saying that roaming costs being equal is not a good thing. That seems to me to be a fairly good starting place. I do agree that you need to make it an equitable system and make it fair to pay-as-you-go people as well. And there's certainly a lot we do need to do in Norfolk in terms of broadband. I actually chair the broadband committee at the county council and looking also at mobile telephone reception. There's certainly areas of Norfolk where you can't get mobile reception at the moment, even for emergency calls and hotspots. And we need to address that very strongly. I don't think I'll say anything else at this point.
Okay, did you have any more on net neutrality specifically?
Not really. I can't say that I know the details of the legislation, to be fair enough. On that.
Okay. Joe Hayes.
As I understand it, the net neutrality legislation it's got many facets, but one of it is this question of preventing a two-tier internet. And my colleagues have been have voted in favour of strong measures to prevent service providers from being able to slow down consumers' band speeds. I hope I'm not talking complete nonsense here, but as I understand it, some large providers who provide things like movies want to be able to provide that faster for extra payment to favoured consumers. And my party is very clear that should not be permitted at the retail end of the market, although it already exists at the wholesale end of the market. And we are very pleased with the recent legislation that's gone through the European Parliament, which I understand now has to be kind of consented to by the European Council representing the 28 individual member states. The reason why the ALDE group and my colleagues are so keen on integrating the 28 markets, the national member states markets, into a single market is to perfect the single market, which is the single main reason why the UK is more prosperous as a result of being in the European Union. And there's been recent expert attempts to estimate the hypothetical situation. What would the UK's economy have been like if we hadn't been in the European Union? And the conclusion, although obviously you're dealing with counterfactual, was that it would have been a much smaller economy and far fewer jobs and far less prosperous country. So we're saying we want to stay in the European Union for the sake of jobs and prosperity. That's our main campaigning theme, and we're very confident that it is backed up by good academic research. And the perfecting the single market in telecommunications is one of the main remaining areas in which barriers have to be dismantled.
Okay, I just want to see if you haven't answered that question though directly, is do we need net neutrality legislation?
Well, I'm saying that the net neutrality legislation that's just been passed by the European Parliament is, my party is very much in favour of, and we need the European Council of Ministers to
Yeah, you can go for it.
pass it into law, because it's co-decision.
So there's a bit in this legislation about blocking, okay, and whether or not you should block certain bits of internet content. So I'm worried by what you say, because on the whole I believe in free speech and the freedom to read things on the internet. But in the original draft of this legislation, there was a specific clause that means that organisations like the Cambridgeshire-based Internet Watch Foundation have the right to take photographs of children who have been sexually abused off the internet, okay, if this is a criminal case. The amendments that you say you're so proud of, that your team passed, deleted that right to take criminal content off the internet, okay? And means that this organisation, which is protecting children, is no longer there. Now, the Lib Dems and the Green Party deleted those with your amendments, okay? To be fair, the UK Labour voted with me that as soon as we were warned by our local organisation, we tried to stop this. But that amendment you deleted, and it means, if it goes through as law, our children will not be able to be protected by this organisation that takes these horrific photographs off the internet.
I'd like to respond to that. That's not my understanding of what the effect will be.
Or maybe you should speak to the Internet Watch Foundation.
Well, as I understand it, the legislation allows for criminal activity to be prosecuted in the usual way, and it's very difficult to actually prevent stuff being put up on the internet, because it will be put up in somewhere like Russia if it's not put up, or Thailand if it's not put up in the UK. I don't know about this organisation in Cambridgeshire and why they should have the
They're
right
the
to
national
block.
organisation of a network of European organisations that has the legal right to remove illegal content. Okay?
Well, I find that somewhat puzzling and disturbing, sort of why it should be them rather than,
Because-
for example, Europol, if I could just finish. As a lawyer, I am very comfortable with the notion that there is an exception to the right to freedom of speech where it involves criminal acts, and where somebody has been abusing children for the purpose of profit, putting stuff on the internet for perverted use, then the primary aim has to be to protect children, which is our duty to young people. And also, I would say there's another aspect of it that troubles me very much, which is use of women who are often in a very weak bargaining position for pornography for profit. But I don't believe that the legislation that's been passed has the effect that Vicky claims.
It does, and I suggest you look at Europol and the organisations that they have set up in each country, including that one. So anyway.
We're straying into different territory here. I think this is all under the sort of banner of censorship, so we'll come to that in a little bit. Were there any questions on net neutrality? If you want to pop your hands up as we go along, I'll try and get to you when there's a break in conversation. Okay. If America goes its own way and undoes net neutrality, does it matter what the EU does? Andrew.
I'd like to sort of come back on the net neutrality.
Very quickly.
But I think that the legislation which went through the EU and backed by the Lib Dems and Liberals and Socialists, I understand, seems right in principle. And I think this particular point does need to be resolved about where the criminal and enforcement agencies can get involved. But I think that it's a small tweaking compared to the principle of net neutrality. In terms of what the effect of the US sort of keeping it unregulated would be, I would say that over time, if Europe goes the right way on having net neutrality, then that's setting up a standard here in Europe, and in time that may challenge whatever's happening from the US. But obviously, the US doing its own thing is going to undermine things because the internet is a global system. So we can only have controls over what's within the borders of Europe, and EU legislation can only have controls over that.
Vicky, forward.
This goes right into the heart of the matter, okay? That the whole issue on blocking and what content is acceptable or not consent is at the heart of the matter. I support the issue of net neutrality. I support the whole package here, but the devil in the detail on should there be some control over certain types of content that is illegal and that may be leading to criminal acts, and that where it is a legal body established through, in this case, a body working with Europol, working with Interpol, is vital. And if the US think that we have gone too far, because we have said you cannot block anything, which is what that amendment did, said you couldn't block any individual image without going to get a court order on that one image, then you will not be able to get global work on the global internet.
Okay,
so you have to have the set of rules that work together. So net neutrality is fine, but where do you say you've gone too far when it comes to illegal content?
Specifically, when we talk about net neutrality, in this instance, we're speaking about throttling content and charging different amounts for different types of traffic.
Charging for different amounts of traffic. If you are going to have some specialised content, you have to be really, really, really careful that that's very tightly defined. So if you're going to say, for example, we are going to give special priority to some medical content. So sometimes now you would have an operation happening in one part of the world and a doctor in another part of the world who's really highly specialised watching that on the internet. Maybe you might say that is highly specialised and that should get priority over every other sort of content. I can understand that, but then you need a very narrow definition. In general, it should be free and it should be neutral. But there is devil in the detail.
So if America goes its own way, which it seems like they are at the moment, does it matter what the EU does around net neutrality?
The things that are pushing America to go their own way, my understanding, are issues like what we've done about not being able to block criminal content and things like that. So not necessarily just on the commercial side.
Okay.